Hello, and welcome to another new episode from The Awakening. This one's a little bit different. It's an interview with a very nice lady called Bridget Upton. Now, Bridget, originally from New Zealand, came over to the UK to train to be a nun. Now, how did that work out? I tell you what, let's go and have a little look, shall we? Welcome, Bridget, to the studio. I got it right.
You did.
All right. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Now, originally, I believe you're from New Zealand?
That's right, yes.
And you were a nun?
Here I was.
What brought you?
In New Zealand, I was an agricultural economist.
Wow, I don't think I can even say that.
Well, I was a fisheries
Don't
economist.
ask me to spell it either.
No.
So you became a nun when you were here?
Yes,
in the UK?
I came here to become a nun.
Right, what started that journey off for you?
That's always very interesting because you're never quite sure, really. But I had come through the sort of evangelical union thing at university, which was big in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right.
And moved on from that, but was still very interested in that whole area of religious commitment, and started to look around and see what how I could best work with this. This is before the ordination of women, even in New Zealand. That was 1976.
Yeah.
And met some people from the Third Order, Franciscans, who are the secular group, who don't live in communities but live under a rule of life, a Franciscan rule of life. And they introduced me to what's called the First Order of the Society of St. Francis in England, and the women's religious life group, the ones who lived in community, were called the Community of St. Francis.
Okay.
There's also an enclosed order called the Order of St. Clare, and these Third Order secular people. So it's there are brothers and sisters of the First Order, sisters of the Second Order, and secular people, all in the Society of St. Francis.
Right. So you felt a calling?
I don't even know what that means. I think there's a lot of romanticism around the concept of vocation and being called. I certainly felt a strong interest, and one of the things I was most interested in was the opportunity to live a simple life that did good in the world. Sounds a bit pompous, but that's how it felt. And I think you can identify that as a calling, although I'm not sure I would now.
Right, because I know, Shirley, my wife, she actually felt a calling, and that was when, just after Dylan was born, she did a TV programme on that, and it came, she really felt a calling.
And Dylan's birth was a moment of crisis for her health and everything, wasn't it?
She was in labour for over 20 hours.
I know, awful.
And she saw a white figure in the room.
Yeah.
And it's then she knew that everything was all right. Because she had been asked, because she was involved in the church, she had been asked to think about it. And she said, no, it's not for me. But after that, Dylan's birth, she was convinced. And
that's how it was for her.
Yes.
I do think there were large numbers of different ways of working this sort of thing out.
I knew that eventually she would.
Yeah.
People around her knew. And when she decided, people said, well, what took you so long? But it's that point. How long were you a nun for?
Technically, I was a sister in religion. The nuns are the fully monastic lot. But 10 years.
Right. And what happened after 10 years?
It happened during the years.
Right.
Do you want
to expand on that?
I can, yes. I found really quite quickly that the community I belonged to was a group of very good women, and some of them very interesting women, but it wasn't strong for women who had an intellectual drive.
Right.
And I struggled with doctrine. I struggled with the articles of belief, what it meant to be a Christian in the 20th century.
You were questioning it, really?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yes. And it wasn't a particularly comfortable place to be doing that. And for various...
Was it like regimented? Was it you kind of...
Well, of course it is, because you're living under a rule of life. You're living under, after 3 years, I took first vows, and they were poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I think that the idea of obedience is very difficult in late 20th century life.
I can understand that.
And I was always, I think, a bit marginal, a bit outside that particular box.
Yeah.
And the community was an interesting one. It had started in London in 1905, and the nuns, the sisters there, did work of taking in washing, laundry, to enable them to take old ladies off the street and look after them till they died. So in a way you could see it as a harbinger of the hospice movement.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very much a doing community.
Right.
And in the Anglican Church, there weren't very many more intellectual opportunities. There was one in Oxford, but they were a bit ladylike for me, I think. So, yeah, I found it a struggle.
Yeah. And
although I started doing a degree in theology while I was still in community, and that was sort of like magic, but I had a really quite serious breakdown.
Right, okay.
And I had about 2 years out of
Was that due to
university.
stress of being in this kind of regimented system, or...?
I think I'd been working on having a breakdown for most of my life. And if you really wanted to know, one of the reasons I probably came to England with a cast iron excuse of going into a religious community was I really needed to make a break with some of my background, which is a very kind and loving background. But again, New Zealand wasn't a very good place for people who were intellectual or odd in any way. And people who were exploring their sexuality.
Yeah.
People who were not really wanting to spend their weekends sailing or tramping or watching rugby.
Yeah.
And people who may be more interested really inside themselves in matters of the intellect or the arts or theatre or something like that.
Well, everyone is different, aren't they? Everyone has different interests. And
that's right.
Their own sort of path that they have to follow.
It was there were only 2 million people in New Zealand when I was a child. I mean, and we were 13,000 miles away from Europe.
I had an uncle, my mother's brother, who married a Maori and moved to New Zealand. Yeah.
It's not for everyone.
No.
It's lovely, and there's lots of very good things about it, but it's not for everyone.
No, we thought about New Zealand before we moved back to Wales. We looked into it and looked at places online and stuff. But it wasn't the right path.
I would suggest it might not be the right path for you.
No.
I think that would be possibly the case. I mean, you can't say it for anyone else. But
No.
I think it was a good place to be brought up in, but not for me a good place to stay in.
Well, a bit like me. Well, I said to you, I was brought up on a council estate, and you know, this is back in the 70s. You had to stand up for yourself. You know, you had to. And of course, they were always going to be bigger boys, older boys. You know, but you had to stand up for yourself. It's just the way it was back then. You know.
I was brought up in a sailing family, and I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah.
I got seasick as well.
I have a friend, well, he's a hairdresser, he cuts my hair for me, and he's of the opinion, you know, because we are in Wales, he says he doesn't fit in because he doesn't follow the rugby, so he's kind of shunned a little bit, but he couldn't care less. He said, I don't want to just fit in, you know, and why should you have to fit in?
Well, I think it's a real problem, and if you're living in a quite structured community and you don't fit in, you are in trouble, really, I think.
Well,
I think that's true.
Yeah.
But, you know, I applied to leave in the end. I was on leave of absence, and the one thing I will say is I was really saved by meeting and working with a really gifted, inspired, and mercifully funny psychotherapist.
Right.
And she became a very close friend, and that saved my life.
Yeah.
Quite straightforwardly saved my life.
Wow. Humour is a big thing.
Oh, she was funny. Yeah.
I mean, even in dark times, you have to have humour. I mean, the banter that goes on between me and Shirley, I can't repeat some of it.
I'm sure you can't and shouldn't.
But it's hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things we get up to is, if there was a fly on the wall listening and recording, then, oh dear.
You'd be in trouble.
I'd be in trouble. Right. Thank you for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
And I'm sure our viewers will really enjoy listening.
Thank you very much, Julian. It's nice to be here.
Do you want some more cake? Thank you. Welcome back. Do hope you enjoyed that. Found the interview enlightening. Now, my thanks again to Bridget for coming into the studio. That's all from me for this episode. Until next time, you all take care and stay safe. Toodle pip!